So on this occasion, I'd like to preach about something that's going on within the church, and it's been an ongoing event for many years now. But the story starts a long time ago, back 476 years ago, in the year 1534, when King Henry VIII of England had himself declared by Parliament as the only supreme head on earth of the church in England. It was the official start of the Anglican schism. And for a while, that schism was healed by his very Catholic daughter, Queen Mary, but she overdid what she was trying to do. She herself was quite cruel. And after her, there was a reaction back towards the Anglican schism under the next queen, who was a Protestant, her half-sister, Elizabeth. In the United States, you don't see churches that say Anglican Church. There's a good reason for that, and it's in American history. So one of the things that the Anglicans do is they take an oath of allegiance. At that time, it was a very serious thing. You took an oath of allegiance to the ruler of the English crown, that is, the English Empire, really. But in the United States, after the revolution against Great Britain, that wasn't a very politically correct thing to do, to have American citizens making an oath of allegiance to England when we'd just broken away from England. So there was a kind of separation, but it was really political. And so in the United States, we have Episcopalians. Really, the Episcopalians are a province of what's called the Church of England, the Anglicans. There are about 2 million Episcopalians in the world. In total, about 80 million Anglicans in the world. So this is not a small division of Christianity. That was 476 years ago. Just 1 year ago, His Holiness Pope Benedict XVI issued a document called Anglicanorum Coetibus. Nice fancy Latin name. Really just referring simply to the joining with the Anglicans. Certainly, he's not referring to all of the Anglicans. He was addressing this document to the situation which exists within the Anglican Church. You may know, if you've been paying attention to how things are going for the Anglicans, that they've taken a, progressive route as of late. I remember when I was in college, one of my friends, just to shock me, showed me a full-page color picture in Time magazine. And the first thing you see is a very beautiful chalice, really lovely. But then you notice the hands holding the chalice, the fingernails are painted red. And I realized, wait, that's a woman's hands. And I looked at the face behind the chalice, sure enough. That was when they were just starting the attempted ordination of women in the Anglican faith. And it went from there to female bishops, and it went from there to openly homosexual priests, and now openly homosexual bishops. Now you understand why some of them don't want to stay Anglican. That's what it comes down to, basically, is that the people are realizing this is not in keeping with the message of the gospel, and they're looking to go somewhere else, and they're looking back at their history, and they're saying, really we don't have that much against the Catholic Church. And we're not so far away from it, and maybe there was a mistake made many years ago. Maybe this move by Henry VIII wasn't such a great move. Henry VIII was a man in a strange way of great faith. To the end of his life, even though he divorced his wife, even though he ended up having 6 wives, 2 of whom he had executed, still he would insist that everyone would genuflect to the Blessed Sacrament in church. He didn't lose his belief in many things, but his lust led him to, in fact, stamp out the Catholic from the Catholic Church, became Anglican. And there were many things that were going on that he didn't know about, like married clergy, even while he was alive. And so the Pope is facing a very difficult situation, because in all those years which have passed, a lot of things have taken place. A lot of walls have gone up between us and them. And not just emotional walls, but also doctrinal walls. One of the first things, which was very serious, was that they changed the rite that they use for the ordination of priests. And the church at that time, when this happened, examined it, and it did not seem to the church that that was a valid rite of ordination for priests. So when Anglican clergy wanted to come back into the Catholic Church, they had to go through a Catholic ceremony of ordination. This caused quite a stir among the Anglicans, as you can imagine. And there were two different things that happened. The first was that many of them said, no, you don't understand. Even though we changed the rite, the intention is still the same, and what we're trying to do is still the same as what you do in the Catholic Church, and that we're still ordaining priests of God. And the other current of response within the Anglicans was to say, we think the Catholic Church is right, or at least we suspect the Catholic Church is right, so we need to do something about this. And so after they got ordained in the Anglican rite, they would go and find another schismatic group like the Old Catholics, and they get ordained a second time, just to be sure. So the Pope is facing that situation, which was later made, in fact, more clear. All the way back in 1896, this came to a real head. There was such a fight between Catholic and Anglican theologians on both sides that he wanted a definite decision. So after a big theological investigation, Pope Leo XIII issued a bull called Apostolicae Curae, and in it he made this decision that Anglican orders, the Anglican ordinations, are absolutely null and utterly void, just to make it clear, meaning no ordination, no priesthood, which means no Mass, which means no Blessed Sacrament, which means no valid confessions. So it was an extremely serious situation, which is why now Pope Benedict XVI has had established an educational system so that those men who are Anglican priests and want to become priests within the Catholic Church have to go through a time of education and formation. And finally, for those that are on track right now and are entering the Catholic Church, they can be ordained, this time for real, in the spring. So there will be many Anglican clergy who will be ordained in the year 2011 to become priests. Then there's the problem of liturgy. In fact, the problem of liturgy was addressed a few years ago when Anglicans were given what is called the Anglican Usage. Interestingly enough, the Anglican Usage looks an awful lot like what you're seeing today. The ancient Anglican Usage, in many ways, is the traditional Latin Mass. Some of the Anglicans are so attracted to what we do, and they realize those are their true roots, that we had a couple of Anglican priests show up at our seminary for training in the traditional Latin Mass. And their faithful would prefer that they say the traditional Latin Mass. So you can see the kind of people that are coming towards the Catholic Church in this difficult situation. And then just 13 days ago, 5 different bishops of the Anglican Church in England made a joint statement that they're all leaving the Anglican Church and they're all going to become Catholics. 3 of them are still in charge of dioceses. 2 are retired, and they're stepping down from their positions at the end of the year, and they're just going to begin their formation. So, of course, if they're not really priests, that means they're not really bishops. So we have a complication there. So they too will have to go through their formation and education. And those that the church finds to be suitable will be able to be made priests and then be made bishops and then be put in charge of what the church is calling ordinariates. Some of you might be familiar with that term. An ordinariate was being discussed about 10 years ago with great enthusiasm in traditional Catholic circles. They were thinking of establishing a traditional ordinariate. At least many people were hoping that they were thinking of establishing a traditional ordinariate. It would have its own bishop, its own priests, its own religious, its own everything. It would function like a diocese, and it would not have territorial boundaries. So Rome is considering and going to make several ordinariates in different parts of the world for those who are going to have the Anglican usage. They'll have their own bishops, their own priests, their own religious sisters, their own seminaries. And then perhaps comes the most difficult of all the questions. And what about those Anglican clergy who are also married? What is to be done? Maybe it's good to start out by saying that although I wouldn't at all counsel not having celibate priests, it does exist at this point in the Catholic Church and has existed in the Catholic Church throughout its history, that there are some priests who are also married. So it's not contrary to the nature of the priesthood. That doesn't mean it's helpful. But it does happen. We have Eastern Rite clergy, Melkites, for example, and others, who have both married and non-married clergy. The way they set it up in the Eastern Rite is that if you're married, you can still enter priestly studies, but once you become a priest, you don't have the option of getting married after that. And they distinguish between the two groups. So the way they're dressed, for example, if you ever notice some of the Eastern Rite clergy have sort of those circular hats. Some of them seem very tall and some are quite short. If you've ever seen pictures of them, you know what I mean. And the taller hats have those large, almost a veil hanging off of them. Those are these priests who are not married. And they also take all of their bishops from monasteries in the Eastern Rite. And the monks are all celibate. Monks are not married. So only the unmarried could become, in the Eastern Rite, bishops. So it's going to be something for the Vatican to consider what they're going to do. And they have already made up their minds how they want to handle it. They don't really want to have married priests, but they realize there could be a circumstance or two where it should be considered. What would be such a circumstance? Well, consider in England where they have some very trendy and progressive priests who perhaps have boyfriends and all that sort of thing. And then you have the local, well, basically your local traditional group with the very conservative priest who takes care of all the traditional and conservative Anglicans. And he decides he wants to be a Roman Catholic priest. And the faithful are very willing to follow him into the Catholic Church because they've been formed by him and they see him as their shepherd. If he approaches one of these new Anglican usage bishops, says, I want to become a priest, but I'm married, that bishop may then send a petition to Rome if he thinks it's a good idea, and then Rome will decide yes or no. But they don't have the door open to people simply, getting married and then entering the seminary. That's not what they're looking at. They're looking at how do we bring all these people into the Catholic Church as efficiently as possible without pushing some of them away. So I'm not saying that I want you to like this part of the provision from the Pope. But I am saying that Rome may decide in certain instances that that will take place. And we have to step back and let the Pope do his work. And hopefully there will be very good fruits from this, and all these people will have some hope in their lives after having gone through a couple decades of sheer misery in the Anglican Church. Then there is the final problem. What do they believe? Why do I say that? Well, first of all, the Anglican Church basically, in putting the king or the queen at the head of the church, no longer had the Pope as the head of the church. So they're going to have to reaffirm that ancient belief that the Pope is the head of the Church, the vicar of Christ. And then what about other things in the Church which have been declared as part of our belief? What about the infallibility of the Pope? The infallibility of the Pope was proclaimed at Vatican Council I, long after the Anglican Schism. What about the dogma of the Immaculate Conception? What about the Assumption of Our Lady? All those things they will have to accept as believing Catholics. The good news is, basically the belief is already there. Because the Anglicans, in spite of all the breakaways and things which went on, followed the Catholic Church in many things. So you still have Anglicans, for example, who pray the rosary every day. They're not your typical Protestants. You still have Anglicans who would have a devotion to Our Lady and even follow developments in devotion to Our Lady. So they believe in things like the apparitions at Fatima. So you find an Anglican saying the Fatima prayer and the rosary. You find Anglicans who would wear a miraculous medal from the apparition of Our Lady at Lourdes. So there have been lots of seeds planted along the way so that their move into the Catholic Church, which is now taking place, is a possibility. The Pope has received an incredible amount of criticism for this openness to them. Almost all of that criticism has come from the hard left types, both within the Catholic Church and within the Anglican Communion. It was, in fact, referred to as the Pope's Anglican Blitzkrieg. That's a very nasty smear. Why? Well, for you younger people who don't know, the word Blitzkrieg referred to a particular kind of warfare practiced by the Germans, and the Pope's a German, and it was used by the Nazis. And the Pope, when he was young, was forced into the Hitler Youth program. So they're indirectly bringing that little thing up once again. Oh, here's this former Hitler Youth, and now he's using a kind of spiritual blitzkrieg against the Anglicans. How cruel of him to use his power in this way. It's really quite vicious. We have to look at what's really happening. What's really happening, and the viciousness is coming from people who've walked away from the gospel of Jesus Christ. When you force on people, female priests, and then female bishops, and then homosexual priests, and then homosexual bishops, and you tell them, this is obedience, you just have to sit there and take it, and you're being cruel and judgmental if you don't like this. That's the cruelty. The Pope is being charitable. He's opening the doors to them. They're suffering and they're fleeing. We have our own problems in the Catholic Church. But at least we know where the truth is. At least we know what we're supposed to be doing. In the Anglican Church, all is confusion. It's a terrible situation. So we have to have a certain level of compassion for these people and what they're going through. And the Pope is doing nothing more than what the Pope's supposed to do. He's trying to reunite Christendom. He's trying to bring all the lost sheep back into the fold. That's his job. And it's our job. And so in spite of the fact that there are certain elements of this reunion which could make us somewhat uneasy, we have to realize what's going on in general is a very good thing. And a sign of hope. Heaven knows there are precious few signs of hope these days. But to know that there are good people who are willing to pick up and leave everything, and even priests who are willing to risk their careers, basically that's what's happening. They may not be ordained. They may end up out on the street with their wife and children and have nothing at all so that they can become Catholic. They don't know. We have to support the Pope and these men by our prayers. There is one thing which makes me wonder, and that is what the Curé of Ars said during his life. He's been dead now over 100 years. And the Curé of Ars, when he spoke about England, he said that he believed there will be a time when the faith would return to England and that England would once again be glorious for the faith. We forget that England was glorious for the faith. You know, England was called Mary's dowry. A dowry for you young people is something that the father would give to his daughter when she married. And you could get a better marriage if you had a better dowry. But you had to have somewhat of a dowry to get married. It was money, property, something like that. So Mary's dowry was the title given to England. Why? Because the people in England were so devoted to Our Lady. They loved her so much, and they built so many churches in her honor. Amazing that the sin of one man has kept them away from the church for almost 500 years. So we hope that the Curé of Ars was right. We hope, in fact, that he was piously speaking, but that he was right. Maybe it was based on an apparition. Maybe it was just his own intuition in prayer. We don't know. But if you look at those 500 years, things got worse and worse and worse, and now they're at the level where it's absolutely unbearable and they can't take it anymore. And so they're coming back. Thanks be to God. Let's pray for the success of this venture of Pope Benedict XVI in this very complex, very delicate situation, and pray for the people who are really leaving what they consider to be their church and coming back at last to the true church.